We'll go ahead and go.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be here in South Forsyth High School. I went to high school in Gwinnett County, so not quite a Forsythian, but I've spent a lot of time in this county. A lot of time, and I've seen it grow and change over the years. But before we get too far ahead into different data for human geography and whatnot, I am in the right class, right? This is human geography, AP human geography. Okay, just making sure. I've actually done that before in Jonesboro. Went to the wrong class, so not my fault. I blame the office person. They directed me the wrong way. It's never my fault, right? But my name is Jerson Vasquez. I'm with the United States Census Bureau here in the Atlanta region. Now there's 6 census regions now. There used to be 12, but just like the rest of federal government, we're trying to consolidate our efforts and try to create a more streamlined government, because if you heard on the news here and there for the last 2-3 years, there's been budget battles. Part of those budget battles have led to us going from 12 to 6 regions. What does that mean for the Atlanta region? Well, we remain the largest workload area of the US Census Bureau. We've got over 50 million people in our region, and we have 7 states now as opposed to 3. We used to have Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. Now we've added the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, also Louisiana and Mississippi. So we've added 4 states, and that much more diversity and good stuff that goes with that. Georgia itself is a rather diverse state, and many people don't look at it that way, but over the last 20 to 30 years, it's really grown in diversity, and I can see it in this classroom, quite frankly. It used to be 20 or 30 years ago, this classroom would have been non-Hispanic white, probably about 95%, and it's changed quite a bit since then. So how did I get started with the Census Bureau? Quite simply, I come from a media background. I went to Meadow Creek High School, and then I ended up going to Georgia State University, and there I studied broadcast production and journalism in general, with Spanish for international business as a double major. 2 languages is always helpful. That helps me right now in my job, because since I'm bilingual, I became a commodity to the Census Bureau to deal with Hispanic communities throughout Georgia, which anybody venture a guess what the ranking is of Georgia as far as Hispanics in the United States? Just throw out a guess. You're right, actually, number 10. Number 10 in the nation. Somebody gave him a cheat sheet, huh? Well, good job. Number 10, and we've been number 10 for several years now, and right behind us on our heels is North Carolina for the last several years. They're at number 11. And Florida is one of the giants in Hispanic population, which I end up going to Florida a lot to do work. So twist my arm, I have to be at the beach every once in a while. You know, it's a rough life for me. But in reality, one of the things that the journalism field prepared me for is this, communication. You know, it's very helpful if you can follow along with data and very statistical and scientific empirical values and evidence, but if you can't communicate it, then you probably wouldn't have my job. My job is kind of twofold. You have to understand the data well enough and then communicate it well enough so that others can learn from it. So that definitely helped me. And when you think of journalism, you don't really think of people who deal with statistics and math. So I'm kind of an outlier, to use a statistical term. And part of that is the fact that I was a sports journalist. And who here likes sports? If you like sports, what is sports heavy in? All sports. Statistics. When you're making an argument over who your favorite players are, usually involving some kind of numerical values to make your argument, or you should. Otherwise, you're probably going to lose arguments real quick. All right, so that's just a little background on me. My family is from Ecuador, South America, and I was actually born at Grady Hospital, so I'm one of the few native Atlantan Ecuadorians, if that makes sense. And I live in Decula, Georgia now with my wife, high school sweethearts, wife of, we're going on 14 years, actually we just celebrated 14 years, 3 kids and 2 dogs. So I got a pretty full household. My oldest daughter just turned 11. So that's just a little bit about me. But let's get moving here, because one thing about the census data, anybody toy with census data, look at it, look at census.gov, show of hands? It's okay.
We did earlier.
Okay, that's fine, and actually that's not uncommon. One of the reasons my department exists is so that more hands will go up in presentations like this. And so I really appreciate your teacher here calling me and making contact with me, because by getting me out here, hopefully you start to see the value of census data, which if you use it wisely will not only serve you to make a good grade in this class, although that's of utmost importance, but also going forward. I mean, I have doctors, CDC people dealing with the Ebola crisis right now, coming to me for data. Well, why is that? Well, because They need to know, because of emergency services and planning, where population density lies and what happens if certain outbreaks happen. They need to plan accordingly. Which hospitals need to be staffed? Is it the emergency room here at Northside Forsyth that's going to need to have more triage centers set up? So things like this, things you don't think about every day, and quite honestly, I don't think about every day, but because of this job, it's made me think of things in a different way. I always joke, anybody ever see that movie, The Matrix? All right, remember that scene where all the binary numbers are raining down? Data is kind of like that. You start to see the world in numbers. You start to see the world as like, what caused there to be more chocolate chip muffins in that Starbucks case? Well, it's probably because the brand muffins aren't selling as well, and they have to adjust in the morning and bake more of the chocolate chip, because not that many people really buy the brand muffin. So those type of things seem inconsequential, but data is at the heart of a lot of decisions. So going forward in your professional life, in your collegiate lives, wherever, it really, really is important. And I get to see it every day, so I'm fortunate. So a little bit more about our region. I'm the Data Dissemination Specialist, just a long title to say that I help people access and understand where our data lies. Most of it can be accessed through census.gov, and hopefully we'll get time to see a few live exercises. The rest of our team is Gail, Monica, Kelly, Marilyn, Ann, and Victoria, and we're spread out throughout those 7 states. All right, so I had to go look up the definition of human geography. It's not a definition you really think about much when you're closing in on 40 like I am, but it's always fascinating. I appreciate this job, always keeps me on my toes. The study of the interaction between human beings and their environment in particular places and across spatial areas. Is that basically what we're looking at here? So I'm sure there's many other things that go into a class like this, but I just wanted to start with a baseline definition. So now that I understand a little bit more about what classroom I'm standing in and what the overall definition is, let me help you understand our hierarchy of census geographic entities. All right, that looks like a hot mess right now, except when you start to look at it a little closer and hopefully through a little explanation, you may get it already, but it makes a lot of sense when you see it enough times like I have. The pathway down the middle are the basic census geographies. So the good thing about the basic census geographies is they're all nested neatly in the category right above it. So census blocks at the bottom are the smallest census geography. They nest nicely within block groups, which nest nicely within census tracts. When I say nest nicely, it means it doesn't cross lines. So when you get up to counties, unlike zip code tabulation areas, which we're all familiar with our zip codes pretty much, you see that's out to the left. That's because zip codes are a postal office invention, and what they do is they can cross county, state lines, and so they're a little bit more loosey-goosey, which doesn't make us statistical-based people very, very comfortable a lot of times. We like things that nest, although we do produce tables for zip code tabulation areas because we know that you're more likely to know what zip code you live in than what census tract you live in. You'd probably have to look up your census tract. I always have to look up mine. I always forget it. So then after counties come states, divisions, which are census regional divisions, and then regions, which the census regions, and then of course everything nests under a nation. Who can venture a guess why American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas is out all alone to the right with a line that goes down back to census blocks? It's a tough question. It's a trick question, and I actually learned more about this once I joined the census in 2008. And that is tribal lands, federally recognized tribal lands and Native American lands are considered sovereign nations. So we have government-to-government relationships, meaning not state government, meaning federal government deals with them as if they're a country within our country, is the best way to look at it. So their hierarchy is a little bit different. They get their own special tabulations and tables, and we deal with them in a very different manner. I just wanted to point that out, but there's a lot of things going on here. We're not going to get into everything, but a lot of them you recognize, of course, congressional districts being a big deal, because at its base, the decennial census, the one we've done every 10 years since 1790, that was the reason it was created, and that is the apportionment of Congress, and that all, of course, has to do with voting and state power and legislation and such. Now after that, there's a lot of other reasons the decennial census exists, but the main one that most people are concerned with is the funding that comes from federal monies, federal grants that gets allocated because of numbers. People are making arguments every day about, well, North Carolina, this particular Mecklenburg County has a grant application for a federal grant for $10 million because we have X, Y, and Z data that tells us that we have this need. Well, somebody in Georgia, in Gwinnett County or in Forsyth County, may be making that same argument. So it's up to plugging in the right empirical data to really be able to make your argument and get those monies, because there's a lot of money that goes out. You're talking about $4 trillion intercensally. You know, that's a lot of money in federal grants, and it's up there for you to make an argument if you're in one of those programs that applies for federal money. So that's another big reason why the census exists. Now, just real quick, some national level stats. These aren't as entertaining when we're talking about a class like human geography, because they only give us the nation, and we, of course, probably like to look at smaller maps, smaller geographic entities and whatnot. But just to let you know, things like the current population survey, when you hear things like the official poverty rate of the United States, that comes from our actual CPS, our current population survey. Consumer price index and other things come from some of these other ones. American Housing Survey is kicking up again. That lets us know certain things like home values, how the house demographics of the nation are looking, and foreign trade statistics are also very popular, especially if you've been noticing any in the news. One of the things that America is trying to do is compete on a global scale in business. And so foreign trade, import, export, that becomes a really big deal for a lot of companies. Now, these are the fun ones for a class like this, because these help us look at the nation in smaller geographic entities. So if I wanted to create a zip code area map of median household income, or of a particular race, ethnicity, or gender even, age group, you know, if I wanted to know where all the people 18 and under are, I can make maps right now in about 10 minutes using American Community Survey statistics and even population estimates, which actually population estimates, important to point out, that's the official federal number for a location when it's not census time. You know, so 2010 was the last census, 2020 will be the next census. So in that interim, you know, you can't just keep on relying on data that's now 4 going on 5 years old. You have to basically look at newer numbers, and a lot of people demand those newer numbers because they're still trying to get those federal grants. They're still trying to make their arguments to their elected official why we need a new road here, why we need a new school here, and population estimates helps to fill that gap. County business patterns has to do more with employers and sectors, industry, things like that, but help us really get an idea of the health of the nation's economy. I've mentioned the decennial census, that's the big one. That's what we're known for, and that's what's been going on since 1790 and was written into the Constitution. And then the economic census, just to clarify, that's a census of businesses that employ people. So it's not the economy of a household. And a lot of people often, when they're starting their data search, that's one of the sticking points early on. They're looking in the economic census for something like poverty or median household income, and it doesn't really fit right there. That actually will still come from the ACS, the American Community Survey. So that was our population in 2010. 2013 population estimates, the newest ones, we're always a year behind on estimates. Anybody have a guess as to what that would be? So from 2010, 308 million, what do you think we're at now? 350, a little lower than that, yes.
325.
A little bit lower than that. One more. 320, getting close. It's actually 316 million. And overall, that's still significant growth, but we've noticed from the 2000 to 2010 census, and really the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a slight leveling of the growth curve if you're plotting it across a graph. That's not unusual. As nations age, and in current times, there's a lot of anecdotal reasons why that's the case. You know, one easy one to point to, without having to be a scientist or crunch a lot of numbers, is that you talk to your grandparents, or if any of you have great-grandparents, they probably had twice as many kids as your parents do now. That was the way things were done 2-3 generations ago. And at the turn of the century, even going back to the 1800s, when people had more land, there was more rural areas, you had to work a farm a lot of times, especially in the South and Southeast. So it helped you as a family to have 6, 7, or 8 kids. Nowadays, how many families do you know with 6, 7, or 8 kids? Probably not many, if any. So that's one of the reasons. There's a lot of different things going on. The cost of raising a child has gone up. You know, it's not like they have those little schoolhouses right next door, there's transportation involved, there's a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces. Some estimates put it at $250,000 or more to raise a child from birth until sending them off to college. So I got 3 kids, so whew, I got a long road. Yeah.
You do a lot with $750,000.
I know, right? So the beauty of census data, and this is going back to 2010 redistricting data, which comes from the 2010 census, is now we get to look at how thematic maps can be made and tell us a visual story. Most people prefer this than what I get to see every day, day in, day out, which is a massive spreadsheet with a lot of little numbers in it. Over time, we've come around. We used to only put out, and when I say we, I mean the Census Bureau, we used to only put out spreadsheets and then an occasional map. More and more, especially over the last 3 to 4 censuses, so 30 to 40 years, we've been doing reports and different tools now that let you make maps like this. Let you be able to look at the Black or African American alone or in combination population and see population as far as percentage per county. This is actually per county, and that's what those colors are indicating. And actually, historically, if you know your history a little and you know your human geography, that is remaining constant with what was called and still is referred to as the Black Belt, which runs through the southeast, and you see it's still prominent. Even though if we look at another map, as far as growth from 2000 to 2010, those lighter orangish colors are actually counties that lost Black or African American alone or in combination population. Now, does that mean there's not still a lot? And well, obviously, if we go back to the map, we still see that those are dark purple right there. But still, it's probably reached a saturation point. And what this tells you is people are moving from the Black Belt, and probably because of jobs, or maybe just they can't find jobs in where they're at, they're spreading out to different parts of the county, or country, I should say, different counties in the country. If you look back and forth again, you see you may not have a high percentage up in the Midwest and whatnot, but this map will tell you that that ratio is changing, and it helps to keep an eye on it to see if that continues. Then eventually those areas on this map might be that dark purple. One of the main things, and you guys would be surprised, much like my daughter at 11 is surprised when I don't know, exactly what applies to cell membrane or cell wall. I haven't taken those biology classes in a while, but you guys are right there where you're learning all these things, and when I tell you something like percent and numeric change, you probably can associate certain things with that. And why I'm smiling and I have this mischievous grin is because I deal with people who are much smarter than us. PhDs, congressmen, I've dealt with a lot of them recently, governors, mayors, city councilmen, county commissioners, and you'd be amazed, and reporters too, how many of them don't see the value of having both numerical and proportion or ratio or percentage change. I have reporters all the time. Today we have a major release, by the way, so my phone is probably blowing up right now. We have the ACS 2013 coming out, the 1-year release, and I am the media relations specialist, one of them for our region. So I have reporters all the time say, well, Forsyth grew an Asian population, I think from the 1990 to 2000 census, it grew quite a bit. And there was a stretch in there where it grew over 1,000%. And they were like all over the headlines. They wanted to write a big story about it. But what does 1,000% mean? What could it mean? It could mean you went from 1 Asian to 10. You see how that changes the impact a little bit? It's kind of funny when I'm dealing with people, and I used to be the same way, how you hear a number and your knee-jerk reaction is to really be blown away by it, but you have to balance more than one statistic out. If you want a better picture when you're doing a research project, a project for this class, in the future when you're doing something for your job, don't just look at one statistic. That gets you in trouble. I've seen many reporters have to print a retraction the next day because they ran with a story before checking with me, and I could have saved them a lot of hassle just because they have to balance it out and look at the whole picture. See, the way I would do a graph like that if I was, speaking of Asian population, here's a little bit of that percent change as in regards to the Asian population. And look at the metro Atlanta area, the counties around there. It experienced a very significant growth, and Forsyth was one of those actually up there as well in the Asian population. If you've noticed in Forsyth County, Johns Creek, along Suwanee, Duluth, it's Korean, predominantly Korean have been impacting that. You even have a new Kia plant south of the city brought in a lot of Koreans from Korea to manage that plant, and they set up roots and they start growing from there. So it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues going forward or if we reach a leveling off point. So there's a lot of things that can happen, but what I was going to say about when I prepare data or a spreadsheet or something, I like to tether the things together when it comes to percentage and numeric growth, in the sense that I'll establish a threshold. Like, of counties that had a numeric change of 1,000 or 10,000 or more, who had the highest percentage. See, so that way you're kind of toggling it so that you're not only looking at one picture, but you're getting a dual-sided portrait of what's going on. So that's a little friendly advice. Hispanic population. I am Hispanic. Try not to be biased, but I did put 2 slides in here because I like to show how this thematic mapping and data can help you. Without looking at one spreadsheet so far, we can tell something from this. I mean, we saw it in the black population just between 2000 and 2010. But what about the Hispanic population in 1980? Does Georgia look very Hispanic in this map? Not at all. Things were much different back then. But give it a few censuses and look at how that map changed. Going back and forth. And I don't have 2000 in here, but between 2000 census and 2010 census, Georgia almost doubled its Hispanic population. So I think it was actually about 96.8% jump. So almost doubling the population. And that's quite significant. And if you've been following any of the news on demographics and statistics, Hispanics and Asians continue to be the fastest growing minority groups in this country. Now, data maps can tell another story as well. Going back a little bit, historically, 1940, you see those states in orange are states that lost population, which traditionally hasn't happened. As you can see by the graph, the line graph, that's the population change. And you see it usually goes upward, so you would expect all states to be growing, right? But what happened in 1940? Anybody know their history here and can venture a guess as to why so many states in the middle were orange? Yes, ma'am. Exactly, the Dust Bowl. So that tells you, and that's the beauty of data and statistics. It may not give you the answer. Luckily, a young lady had the answer, but it lets you ask the right questions to start finding, okay, something's off here. It lets your mind know right away in a nice pictorial way, what is it? How can I research it? What questions do I need to ask to get solutions or answers? Patriotic plurality. That's a little bit of a fun way of me saying that plurality is an interesting word. In this case, it means that no one race or ethnic group has the majority. And by majority, I just mean more than 50%. That's what this nation is becoming. Now, the way you hear it in the news is majority-minority. The nation has become about 11% counties majority-minority, or what we prefer to call in statistical terms a plurality. In other words, you take the combination of non-Hispanic whites is the baseline. That's traditionally the majority in this country. And then you combine the minority groups, which is all the races other than white non-Hispanic, along with the Hispanic ethnicity. And when that combination of minorities exceeds the non-Hispanic white majority, then you have what we call a majority-minority county. What does this mean? That's just a lot of words to say the nation is becoming more diverse. The white majority that is non-Hispanic is no longer a dominating force in much of the country. And actually, by about 2043, it's supposed to be like that in most of the country, countrywide. ACS, I wanted to talk about that because a lot of the data we've seen is census data. Well, ACS, the American Community Survey, really was born from the census. We used to have 2 census forms that came out. We used to have a short form and a long form. Now we only have the short form. The long form turned into the ACS. So the long form is important because it asks more than just population questions. The census form, if anybody's ever seen one, anybody ever seen census form? Okay, they're very short. 10 questions, in or you're out. You know, depending on how many people you have in your house, it could be a very quick or or a little bit longer of a census operation there of giving us your information. However, the ACS can have over 40 data topics, so depending on how you answer the questions, you could be there sitting at your table for about 45 minutes or online. You can do it online now. But the importance of the ACS is it gives us different characteristics that we just don't have time to ask everyone. So we take a sampling of the population and we ask questions like ancestry. And this is a word cloud. If you know how a word cloud works, in a data grouping, the more number of, say, people who reported German ancestry, the bigger the word in the word cloud becomes. So in Georgia, you see German and English ancestry. That stands out. You got some Irish, West Indian, Italian. You see certain things jump out. I can't see my Ecuadorian one, but you know, that's okay. We're not that many in this state, but maybe you see yours up there, your ancestry of some sort. This is the beauty of ACS data. It lets us go further into characteristics. It's either social characteristics, economic characteristics, housing characteristics, or demographic characteristics. Okay, real quick, I don't want to get too much into this. I'd rather go to some fun live stuff, but just a little overview on the ACS, because it's really what you'll be using more if you're going to use it to map and do things in this class, because it gives you those 40 plus topics, which lets you map by a lot more and have a lot more fun with it. It's hyperlocal, meaning it goes down to the block group level, census tracts, zip code tabulation areas, all those. It's highly comparable to other ACS especially, and it can be very current as far as annual. Although some smaller geographies have to wait every 5 years just to get a large enough sample size. Age, race, sex, Hispanic origin on basis staples of demographic characteristics. See some of the social characteristics up there. I'm not going to go through them one by one. Economic characteristics. This is very important to people planning our communities and planning our future. And elected officials, because it goes over income, sources of income, employment status, occupation, different things to give you the health of the household economy in an area. And then housing characteristics. This one's fascinating to me because I normally didn't feature this, but working with emergency services in both Forsyth and Gwinnett County, I recently had to delve into these numbers a little more, because when you're talking about occupancy and structure and the materials a house is built with and things like that, emergency response people, fire stations, are very keen on those things. And it was news to me, but then when they started talking, it made sense. Because basically, if they know what a material a house is made of and what year it was built, they can tell me with fair certainty if that house is likely to be outdated as far as some of the code requirements, like carbon monoxide detectors and things like that. People don't always update that stuff, and if your house was built in 1979 or something like that, it wasn't necessarily required. They also know certain materials burn faster than others. So if there's a lot of houses that have certain materials that may burn quicker, they're going to put a fire station closer by, so they have a faster response time. So those are fun things about my job that I get to learn as I go, because I wouldn't have really thought of that otherwise, but it makes perfect sense when somebody like a fire chief explains it to you. Just a little something on the limitations of the ACS data. The data areas with populations, and data areas meaning census geographic entities, remember that that hierarchy I showed you, of 65,000 or more, they're in the driver's seat because they get an annual update on ACS data. We're able to do that because it's large enough sampling of the population in those larger areas to produce that. A step down is the 3-year estimate or 36-month collection of data. So those are census geographies of 20,000 or more. And then finally you have the 5-year. So if you want zip code tabulation areas, census tracts, it defaults to the 5-year, which you may want to default to anyways in most cases, even though it's the least current. It's the most accurate, because with the larger sample collection, the margin of errors are going to go down, so it's a more accurate and stable data set. And there we see those geographic entities, again, represented by the ACS, and these all, including blocks, the smallest geography, are also applicable to census, to the actual decennial census. So that real quick. Now, some of the tools and resources we've had on we have currently on census.gov, we're trying to get a lot more visual, have a lot more fun. And so now I'm going to go over to some of those live examples and see if we can't make things work. And actually, I would need a Wi-Fi connection. Is there one here? Okay, great. So let me escape this.
You turned your phone off, right? So you're not stealing the Wi-Fi, are you?
Okay, which one is it? Is it?
BYOT.
Gotcha. All right, and any password, or is it pretty?
No, it's open.
Great. All right.
If
So
that doesn't work, I have a landline we can connect you to.
all right, so let's see if we can get this thing to cooperate. Meet the homecoming queen who plays football.
There you go. You gotta check the news every once in a while, ladies and gentlemen, see what's going on.
Census.gov is the starting point if you want to do your data research. And it's actually been revamped several times. I I'm very happy to be a part of the headquarters committee that helps in reshaping the census website. And I say reshaping because it is a massive undertaking. I know you didn't see the census website 5 or 6 years ago, but it was a mess. It had like 300 hyperlinks right in front of you. You couldn't find anything. So we've come a long way. We have more of a visual navigation system, you know, traditional kind of mouse over, drop-down menus and whatnot. And just to give you an idea of what we're wrestling here, we have as many extensions on census.gov as a little place called Amazon.com. So a lot going on, and a lot of that is data related. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to get data, and people's eyes are drawn to the US population clock and the world clock. That's ticking. This is unofficial, but it is based on real data and input, administrative records and other things. So it's kind of interesting how this works. And just to show you, because everybody likes to know what's making those numbers move so much, here's the basic background to the population clock. If we get, it took a while, there we go. All right, so right here, the components of population change is a birth every 8 seconds, yeah? One death every 13 seconds, sadly. One international migrant, somebody coming from a foreign land, every 38 seconds. And all that equals out to a net gain of 1 person every 12 seconds. The other day I pulled it up, it was 1 person every 14 seconds. So not exactly sure who's behind the curtain pulling all these figures and numbers, but it's very fascinating to look at. It's kind of fun. And you see the world population clock keeps on ticking on the right as well. But besides that, you know, the easiest way to get data on our site is just through our quick facts right in the middle. You know, if I go to Georgia, immediately I get information. You see what I'm talking about as far as nesting the state within the country, the nation. You see the most recent population estimate, 2013. And that's what I like about quick facts. It kind of is an assortment of different data coming in from different data sets, which doesn't always happen in our other data resource, data digging tools. A lot of times you have to pick a data set, work with it for a while, and then move on to the next data set. Quick facts is a nice little summary that pulls in population estimates, pulls in when you see things like the 2013, I'm sorry, go down here. When you see those ranges like 2008 to 2012, that would be a 5-year ACS. And if ever there's a doubt or a question, you can always press the information button and it takes you to all the methodology and all the information you could possibly want. We could do Georgia, we could do counties within Georgia, and if it's a city of 5,000 or more, we can do cities that are that large. We can't load them all up, it just takes too long. So if your city is somewhat large, you can even pull it down from that and get quick facts. But that's just one quick way. There's not been a visual interpretation of quick facts. We're working on that. It's gotten held up. We would like for the data to come up in one column and some kind of map to come up in the right. Everything in government takes a lot of checking and rechecking and making sure everything's right. So we're working on that, but hopefully we'll get it out soon. But some of the other things we have that are more visual are things like Census Explorer. We're going to skip American Fact Finder right now because I want to show Census Explorer, because when you're talking about human geography and the ability to look at how humans are working within spatial areas, in this case states, counties, and even census tracts, this is a good tool to use, and it's more dynamic than just a static table from those reports that I showed on the slides. And I'll show you how. So we have the population estimates edition. Let's see what we want to use first. And we've been coming out with different ones. Let's look at the people, education, and income, which was actually the first one that came out. All right, so it defaults to median household income, and this is what I mean by a little bit more interactive. If I scroll over Georgia, it tells me that $49,604 is the median household income. That's according to the ACS of 2012. So that